All right, so let's dive into a story that I think is hiding in plain sight. You know that iconic photo
Mhm.
of the transcontinental railroad completion at the Promontory Summit in 1869. The one with the champagne bottles and the, big celebration. What's fascinating and kind of unsettling is that the photo is missing a huge chunk of the workforce that was responsible for that achievement, thousands of Chinese railroad workers. Today we're going to unearth their story and understand how vital their contributions were to this, symbol of American progress.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That photo, it really does kind of capture that selective memory that often surrounds these monumental achievements.
Yeah.
But, it's important to understand the context here. The Central Pacific Railroad, which built the line eastward from California, they faced this immense labor shortage.
Right.
White workers were in really short supply, and the ones they did find often left for the gold mines or other better-paying jobs.
So they were desperate, but still hesitant to hire Chinese workers. What changed their minds?
Necessity, I think. Um, they gave a few Chinese laborers a chance, and they were pretty quickly impressed. These workers proved to be highly skilled, efficient, and incredibly reliable. Word spread. And soon they became the backbone of the Central Pacific's workforce.
I'm curious about the scale of this workforce. Just how many Chinese workers are we talking about here?
We're talking about a massive workforce, between 15,000 and 20,000 workers at the peak of construction. I mean, to put that in perspective, that's not just a handful of individuals. That was a significant portion of the labor force.
Mm.
And most of these workers, they hailed from Guangdong province in China, a region that had a long history of sending people overseas for work. And think about their journey for a moment. They traveled by ship to California, then endured these grueling rides in rail cars to reach the constantly moving construction frontier.
Wow. And to think that they arrived in a completely new environment, facing a language barrier, and likely a good deal of prejudice. What was their daily life like on the railroad?
Well, they were organized into groups called gangs of about 30 men, often with ties of kinship. They lived, worked, and ate together, which created these incredibly strong bonds and fostered this remarkable sense of teamwork.
That gang system sounds interesting. Was that common practice back then? Was it exploitative in nature?
It was common for large-scale labor projects at the time, and yes, it definitely had the potential to be exploitative. While it did offer some benefits for workers, like a sense of community and shared resources, it also allowed companies to exert more control. You know, isolate workers, make them dependent on the company for their basic needs.
So within this gang system, did they manage to hold on to any aspects of their own culture?
Absolutely. They found ways to adapt and recreate aspects of their culture in this new environment. Chinese cooks prepared traditional meals. They practiced herbal medicine. And their tight-knit communities provided a support system in the face of, adversity.
It's fascinating how they carved out a space for themselves within such challenging circumstances. But let's not shy away from the reality of their situation. It wasn't just cultural differences they had to contend with.
Right.
They were also facing incredibly dangerous working conditions.
Yeah, you're right. They worked 6 days a week in all kinds of weather,
Yeah.
from scorching heat to freezing snow. And the work itself was incredibly dangerous. I mean, they were tasked with blasting tunnels through the Sierra Nevada mountains. Imagine the constant threat of explosions, rock slides, avalanches.
And it wasn't just the inherent dangers of the mountains, they were also treated very differently compared to their white counterparts.
Yes. And this is where the story gets even more unsettling. They faced blatant discrimination, earning lower wages for the same work, often assigned the most dangerous tasks, and subject to prejudice from their supervisors and fellow workers. In fact, there's this particularly chilling detail that speaks volumes about how they were perceived at the time. Their names were rarely recorded, they were hired through middlemen, and often referred to by nicknames, which essentially erased their individual identities from official records.
It's as if their contributions were deliberately being made invisible.
Exactly. And that erasure continued, even after the railroad was completed. With the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, this act barred Chinese laborers from immigrating to the U.S. and denied citizenship to those already here.
It's heartbreaking to think about how they were being punished for their hard work and contributions. But before we dive into the Exclusion Act and its impact, let's talk about a remarkable moment of resistance. These workers weren't simply accepting these injustices, were they?
Not at all. In 1867, in this stunning act of defiance, they organized a strike. This is a crucial part of the story because it challenges the perception of these workers as passive victims. They knew their worth and they were willing to fight for their rights.
That's incredible, especially considering the power imbalance and the risks involved. Can you tell us more about this strike and what led up to it?
Well, it was triggered by a major accident that highlighted the dangerous conditions they were facing. But the underlying cause was this: deep-seated resentment over the wage and hour disparities compared to their white counterparts. And the strike itself was remarkably well coordinated. Workers along a 30-mile stretch of the railroad, they laid down their tools simultaneously.
Wow, that must have sent shockwaves through the Central Pacific. What was the outcome of this strike? Were they successful in achieving their demands?
The Central Pacific, of course, tried to crush the strike by cutting off food supplies. It was a David and Goliath situation. And while the strike was eventually broken, there's a fascinating twist here. The company quietly increased wages and reduced working hours shortly after. So even though it wasn't a complete victory, it demonstrated the power of collective action and forced the company to acknowledge their grievances.
That's a testament to their courage and solidarity. It's clear that they weren't just nameless, faceless laborers. They were individuals with hopes, dreams, and the will to fight for their dignity. Now let's shift gears and talk about a specific location that really embodies the scale and difficulty of their work: Summit Camp and the legendary China Wall. Can you paint us a picture of what life was like at Summit Camp?
Summit Camp was the highest point on the transcontinental railroad, perched high in the Sierra Nevada mountains. It was a harsh environment. Brutal winters. The work was backbreaking. But it was also a place where the workers' ingenuity and resilience were on full display. And a prime example of this is the Summit Tunnel, a passage 5 football fields long, carved through solid granite. I mean, imagine the sheer determination and backbreaking labor required to complete such a feat using hand tools and explosives.
It's mind-boggling. And then there's the China Wall, which we touched on earlier. Can you tell us more about this incredible structure?
The China Wall stands near the Summit Tunnel. It's a 75-foot tall wall, built entirely of dry stacked rocks. It was a marvel of engineering and a testament to the workers' skill and resourcefulness. And this wall, built over 150 years ago, still stands today as this silent witness to their remarkable efforts.
It's incredible to think about these workers meticulously placing each rock, creating this enduring structure. Is there any effort to preserve this site, especially the China Wall, as a historical landmark?
There have been efforts, yes, but there's this tension between preserving the past and the realities of the present. You see, the concrete snowsheds built to protect the tracks are now covered in modern graffiti. And it raises some interesting questions about how we choose to remember and honor the past.
It's a poignant reminder that history isn't always neat and tidy. There are layers of narratives competing for attention. So the Transcontinental Railroad is finally completed, the Golden Spike is driven. What happened to these thousands of Chinese workers? They didn't just vanish, did they?
Absolutely not. Their stories don't end there. Some continued working on railroads, building feeder lines branching out from the main transcontinental line. Others sought new opportunities and joined existing Chinese communities or started new ones, contributing to the growth and development of the American West.
So they became integral members of these communities, taking on various roles and contributing to the fabric of society. It's inspiring to see how they rebuilt their lives after facing such hardship. But sadly, I imagine the prejudice and discrimination didn't magically disappear with the completion of the railroad, did it?
Sadly, no. In fact, it intensified in many ways.
Let's unpack that a bit more after a quick break. We'll be right back with more on the deep dive. We were just discussing how, even after the Transcontinental Railroad was finished, the prejudice against Chinese workers didn't just disappear.
Yeah, it's a tragic chapter in American history. They became scapegoats for a range of social and economic anxieties. Politicians and newspapers fueled this anti-Chinese sentiment, blaming them for depressing wages and taking jobs away from white workers. And this resulted in a wave of discriminatory laws and acts of violence targeting Chinese communities.
The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which we touched on earlier, seems to be a culmination of this anti-Chinese sentiment. What were the immediate and long-term consequences of this act?
Well, it was a watershed moment. The act barred Chinese laborers from immigrating to the U.S. And denied citizenship to those already here. And this effectively halted Chinese immigration for decades, tore families apart. Existing communities were devastated because they were prevented from bringing over relatives or starting families. And those already in the U.S. faced increased discrimination, making it difficult to find work or even just live peacefully. The long-term consequences were profound. It solidified this idea of Chinese people as perpetual foreigners and fueled a legacy of prejudice that would take generations to overcome.
It's a stark reminder of how easily fear and prejudice can be used to justify injustice. But amidst this dark chapter, were there any glimmers of hope? Did anyone speak out against this blatant discrimination?
There were individuals and organizations that did speak out against the Exclusion Act and the broader anti-Chinese sentiment. Labor unions, religious groups, and some progressive politicians recognized the injustice and argued for equal treatment. However, their voices were often drowned out by the dominant narrative of fear and exclusion. It's a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming opposition, it's crucial to stand up for what's right and challenge systems of oppression.
Absolutely. It's those voices of dissent that often pave the way for change, however long it may take. Now, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about the efforts to reclaim this lost history and give these workers the recognition they deserve. I understand there have been some powerful and symbolic acts in recent years.
Yeah, there has been this growing movement to shine a light on the contributions of Chinese railroad workers and correct the historical record. One particularly moving example is the story of Connie Yang Yu, a descendant of a Chinese railroad worker. She delivered this powerful speech at the 150th anniversary of the Golden Spike ceremony in 2019, reclaiming her family's legacy and demanding recognition for the countless others whose stories had been silenced.
I'd love to hear more about Connie's speech and the impact it had. What were some of the key points she highlighted?
Her speech was a powerful testament to the resilience and contributions of Chinese Americans. She spoke about the pride her ancestors took in their work despite the hardships they faced, and emphasized their rightful place in the fabric of American history. And she called for greater awareness of their sacrifices and demanded that their story be fully integrated into the narrative of the transcontinental railroad. Her speech resonated deeply with many people, and it helped to galvanize the movement for greater recognition.
Her story really underscores the importance of reclaiming family histories and amplifying the voices that have been marginalized. Were there other efforts to visually represent this missing piece of history?
Absolutely. Remember that iconic photo of the Golden Spike ceremony we talked about earlier, the one that's conspicuously missing any Chinese workers? Well, in 2014, photographer Corky Lee decided to recreate that photo, but this time he filled it with Chinese descendants.
What a powerful and symbolic gesture. It's like reclaiming that space.
Yeah.
And inserting those who were deliberately erased.
Exactly. It was a visual representation of correcting the historical record,
Right.
and the photo went viral and sparked conversations about representation, inclusion, and the importance of telling a more complete and accurate history.
It's amazing how a single image can be so impactful. And it wasn't just symbolic gestures, right? There have also been some official acknowledgments, haven't there?
Yes, and this is a significant step forward. In 2014, the U.S. Department of Labor recognized the contributions of Chinese railroad workers by adding them to their Wall of Honor. This was a long overdue acknowledgement of their sacrifices and their vital role in building this nation.
It's great to see that official recognition, however belated it may be. But this isn't just about correcting the past. It's about understanding the present and shaping a more inclusive future.
You're right. By acknowledging these hidden histories, we can start to unravel the complex legacies of racism and discrimination that continue to impact our society today.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to a story I thought I knew. And it makes me wonder what other stories are out there hidden in plain sight, waiting to be unearthed.
That's the beauty of history, isn't it? There's always more to discover. And as we delve deeper, we gain a richer understanding of ourselves, our nation, and the world around us.
This journey through the history of Chinese railroad workers has been incredibly insightful, and it leaves us with a lot to think about.
It certainly does. And hopefully it's sparked a curiosity in you, our listener, to continue exploring these hidden histories and uncovering the untold stories that shape our world. What other narratives are waiting to be brought to light? What can you do to amplify those voices and contribute to a more inclusive and accurate understanding of history?
Those are powerful questions for all of us to consider. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden history of Chinese railroad workers. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've seen the backbreaking labor, the cultural adaptations, the blatant discrimination, and the remarkable resilience of these workers. But what does it all mean? What's the lasting impact of this hidden history?
Well, I think it challenges us to think critically about, the narrative of American progress. The Transcontinental Railroad is often hailed as this symbol of, American ingenuity and ambition. But this deep dive reveals a much more complex and nuanced story. I think it forces us to acknowledge the often overlooked contributions of marginalized groups and to question, Whose stories were privileged and whose are erased.
Right. It's
You
like
know,
we've been looking at this iconic image of progress, but through a lens that's been distorted, leaving out this crucial part of the picture.
yeah, and it's not just about the Transcontinental Railroad. This story, it serves as a microcosm of this broader American experience. It reflects the ongoing struggle for equality and inclusion that continues, quite frankly, to this day. By understanding this hidden history, we gain a more complete and accurate understanding of who we are as a nation.
So, what can we learn from this story? How can we apply these lessons to our own lives and to the world around us?
Well, I think it encourages us to be more critical consumers of history, to question the narratives we've been told, and to seek out those missing voices. It reminds us to be mindful of the ways in which power and privilege shape our understanding of the world, and to challenge systems of oppression wherever we encounter them.
It's about recognizing that history isn't just something that happened in the past, it's alive, and it continues to shape our present and our future.
Exactly. And by engaging with these stories, by honoring the struggles and triumphs of those who came before us, we can work towards building a more just and equitable future.
Well said. I think this deep dive has left us with a lot to ponder.
It certainly has. And hopefully, it sparked a curiosity in you, our listener, to continue exploring these hidden histories and uncovering the untold stories that shape our world. What other narratives are waiting to be brought to light? What can you do to amplify those voices and contribute to a more inclusive and accurate understanding of history?
Those are powerful questions for all of us to consider. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden history of Chinese railroad workers. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.